David, Sarah began, I've been doing a lot of thinking. Oh, here we go, I thought, bracing myself. About our marriage, she continued, swirling her wine glass with an air of theatrical contemplation. And I've come to a decision. Please let it be that you're leaving me for a silent monk, I silently pleaded. I want to open our marriage. The alarm clock shrieked, a jarring start to another meticulously planned Tuesday. 6 a.m., time to morph back into super dad, or, as I preferred to think of it, domestic pack mule. I dragged myself out of bed, the side Sarah usually occupied a vast, cold expanse. She was already up, probably meditating or communing with her inner goddess or whatever the latest self-help trend dictated. Me? I commune with the snooze button. Downstairs, the breakfast assembly line awaited. Cereal boxes lined up like tiny soldiers, milk cartons at attention, the toaster humming a monotonous tune. My two kids, Emily and Ben, were surprisingly self-sufficient for their ages, probably because they learned early on that Dad's morning brain was best left undisturbed. I poured milk, dispensed Cheerios, and tried to look enthusiastic about the impending school day. My internal monologue, however, was a different story. Another day, another dollar, or, in my case, another $100 so Sarah can have her bi-weekly yoga retreat. Sarcasm was my coping mechanism. It was either that or screaming into the void. The drive to work was a blur of traffic and NPR. My job, corporate finance, the epitome of soul-crushing monotony, was my sanctuary. Or at least it was a distraction. I could lose myself in spreadsheets and quarterly reports, a welcome escape from the domestic battlefield. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my days managing other people's money because I was apparently terrible at managing my own life. Dinner was, well, dinner. The culinary highlight of the day was usually whatever the kids hadn't managed to fling at the walls. Tonight, it was chicken surprise. Surprise being that it tasted vaguely of cardboard. Sarah, of course, was a picture of serene domesticity, regaling us with tales of her day. Something about a chakra alignment workshop and the transformative power of crystals. I nodded along, occasionally interjecting with a grunt or a "that's nice," my mind a million miles away, calculating the mortgage payment and wondering if I could expense therapy. Then the bomb dropped. "David," Sarah began, her voice taking on that ominous, velvety tone that usually preceded some new, expensive demand. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." Oh, here we go, I thought, bracing myself. My internal sarcasm meter went into overdrive. About our marriage," she continued, swirling her wine glass with an air of theatrical contemplation. "And I've come to a decision. Please let it be that you're leaving me for a silent monk," I silently pleaded. "I want to open our marriage." The chicken surprise suddenly tasted like sawdust. I stared at her, my brain struggling to process the words. "Open our marriage?" I finally managed, the words feeling foreign and clumsy in my mouth. "Yes," she said, as if she were suggesting a new restaurant. "I think it would be very liberating for both of us." Liberating. The word hung in the air, dripping with irony. I felt a surge of anger, a primal urge to tell her exactly where she could shove her liberation. But then I looked at the kids, their faces mirroring my confusion, and the anger subsided, replaced by a dull, familiar ache. "And," she added, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "if you say no, we might as well get divorced." The ultimatum, so blunt, so casually cruel. I was trapped, stuck between a rock and a hard place, between my resentment and the well-being of my children. I wasn't a hero. I was a pragmatist. I was a father. "Fine," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "If that's what you want." The relief on her face was sickening. She beamed, reaching across the table to take my hand. Her touch felt alien, unfamiliar. That night, I moved to the spare bedroom. The space felt vast and empty, mirroring the hollowness inside me. I lay in the darkness, listening to the silence of the house, the silence of our marriage. I thought about Sarah, her easy smile, her effortless charm. I thought about the kids, their innocent faces, their unwavering love. And I thought about myself, the man I used to be, the man I was slowly losing. The resentment was a living thing now, a seed planted in the fertile ground of my despair. I closed my eyes, picturing the spreadsheets waiting for me at work, the endless columns of numbers, the comforting predictability of it all. It was an escape, a refuge, and in that moment I knew I would cling to it like a lifeline. 2 years, 730 days. That's how long I'd been living in the Twilight Zone. Or, as Sarah preferred to call it, our evolved relationship. Evolved, apparently, meant I worked 70-hour weeks to fund her evolution, while she, well, evolved. Into what, exactly, I wasn't entirely sure. A guru, a performance artist, a professional napper? The possibilities were as endless as my despair. My life had become a montage of monotonous routines. Wake up, kids, work, kids, sleep, rinse, and repeat. My social life had withered and died, starved of attention. My friends, bless their souls, had tried to drag me out, but David's busy had become their standard reply. Busy being a human ATM, mostly. Sarah's freedom, of course, was a different story. Her calendar looked like a United Nations summit, a whirlwind of yoga retreats, art openings, and empowerment workshops. I pictured her surrounded by crystals and chanting mantras, while I battled spreadsheets and existential dread. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. Coming home to an empty house became the new normal. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos of family dinners past. I'd walk through the rooms, the echoes of laughter long gone, replaced by the hollow thump of my own footsteps. Sometimes, I'd find a stray crystal on the coffee table, a silent reminder of Sarah's ethereal pursuits. I'd pick it up, turning it over in my hand, wondering if it held the secret to happiness, or at least a decent night's sleep. Birthdays came and went, marked by perfunctory cards and the lingering scent of Sarah's expensive perfume. Anniversaries were a distant memory, a relic from a time when us meant something other than me funding her. I started noticing other families, the easy camaraderie, the shared jokes, the simple act of holding hands. A pang of envy would hit me, a sharp reminder of what I'd lost, or perhaps what I'd never truly had. My internal monologue grew more introspective, a dangerous sign. Self-awareness was never my strong suit. It tended to lead to uncomfortable truths. Then something shifted. It wasn't a grand epiphany, no lightning bolt of enlightenment. It was something small, almost insignificant. I ran into Mark, an old college buddy, at the grocery store. We hadn't seen each other in years. He was married, 2 kids, the whole 9 yards. He looked happy. Not ecstatic, not blissfully ignorant, just content. We talked for a while, catching up on life, kids, work. He asked about Sarah. I mumbled something about open marriage, and he gave me that look. You know the one. The, I'm trying to be supportive but seriously, dude. Look. You okay, David? He asked, genuine concern in his eyes. Yeah, fine, I lied, the word tasting like sawdust. Just fine. He didn't push it. He just said, if you ever need to talk. And that was it. A simple human connection. A reminder that I wasn't alone. That there was a world outside of work and resentment. That maybe, just maybe, I deserved more than this. It was a tiny flicker, a spark in the darkness. But it was there, and it was enough to make me question everything. The seed of rebellion, dormant for so long, finally began to sprout. The conversation with Mark lingered. It was a tiny pebble that started an avalanche in my mind. If I was going to make a change, I needed a plan. And step 1 was financial freedom. Ironic, isn't it? I spent my life managing money for other people, yet I'd never taken the time to manage my own. That had to change. I made an appointment with a financial advisor, a crisp, efficient woman named Miss Evans. I laid out my situation, the open marriage, the resentment, the creeping feeling that I was living someone else's life. She listened without judgment, her expression neutral. So, she said when I finished my rambling monologue. You want to create an exit strategy. Exactly, I said, but not a dramatic one. More like a strategic withdrawal. Miss Evans smiled, a thin, professional smile. I can work with that. Over the next few weeks, we crunched numbers, reorganized investments, and streamlined my budget. It turned out I was in better shape than I thought. Years of relentless work had finally paid off. I could afford to cut back my hours, secure the kids' future, and still live comfortably. It wasn't about getting rich. It was about buying myself freedom. With the financial side sorted, I turned my attention to the physical. I joined a gym, a sweaty, testosterone-filled arena that I'd avoided for years. My first workout was a comedy of errors. I nearly tripped over a treadmill, mistook a bicep curl machine for a medieval torture device, and spent most of the time trying to figure out how the locker room worked. But surprisingly, I enjoyed it. The physical exertion, the feeling of my muscles burning, it was a release. I started eating better, too, trading chicken surprise for actual, food. I even rediscovered old hobbies, like playing guitar, something I hadn't touched since college. My narration during this period was a mix of self-deprecating humor and a growing sense of something. Hope? Maybe. Then came the travel bug. I booked a solo trip to the coast, a place I'd always wanted to visit. The drive down was liberating, the windows down, the music blasting. I checked into a small beachfront hotel, the kind with peeling paint and a slightly musty smell, but the view was breathtaking. I spent my days walking on the beach, swimming in the ocean, and exploring the local towns. I ate seafood, drank local beer, and actually talked to strangers. It was exhilarating. For the first time in years, I felt alive. My narration during this trip became more vibrant, reflecting my newfound enthusiasm. Back home, Mark, bless his meddling heart, decided I needed a social life. "You need to get back out there, man," he said one evening over beers. "Meet someone new." "I'm not sure I'm ready for that," I admitted. "Ready or not, you're going," he declared. "I've set you up on a blind date." "A blind date?" I choked. "Mark, are you trying to kill me?" "Relax," he said. "She's great. A friend of Sarah's, actually." "Oh, that's just perfect," I muttered. The date was... Well, it was a date. I was awkward, nervous, and spent the first 10 minutes convinced I was going to spill my drink all over her. Her name was Jane. She was a writer, witty, intelligent, and surprisingly down-to-earth. "So," she said after we'd made the small talk rounds, "Mark tells me you're experiencing some changes in your life." "That's one way to put it," I said with a wry smile. I briefly explained my situation, the open marriage, the separation. She listened intently, her expression thoughtful. "Wow," she said when I finished. "That sounds complicated." "It is," I admitted, "but I'm working on it." We talked for hours that night about books, movies, our lives. She made me laugh, something I hadn't done in a long time. There was a connection there, a spark. I left the date feeling hopeful. It was a small thing, a tiny glimmer in the darkness. But it was enough. It was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally waking up. Jane was different, refreshingly so. There was no pretense with her, no hidden agendas. She was genuine, kind, and had a wicked sense of humor that matched my own. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, a mix of witty banter and genuine curiosity. We talked about everything and nothing, from the mundane to the profound. She listened intently, her eyes sparkling with interest, not a hint of judgment or pity. It was a novel experience. "So," she asked me one evening as we were strolling through a park, "what's your favorite kind of ice cream?" "That's an important question," I said, feigning seriousness. "One that requires careful consideration. I'm partial to mint chocolate chip, but I have a soft spot for anything with caramel." "Excellent choices," she said, nodding approvingly. "A man of refined taste." We shared an ice cream cone, laughing as we dripped melted chocolate on our shirts. It was a simple moment, but it felt significant. I hadn't laughed like that in years. The easy banter, the shared jokes, it was nice, normal, something I'd almost forgotten existed. My narration during this time took on a lighter tone. The cynicism was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it was tempered by a growing sense of optimism. I found myself smiling more, noticing the good things, the small joys. The world seemed a little brighter, the colors a little more vibrant. It was as if Jane had opened a window and let the sunshine in. One evening, we were having dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant. The conversation turned to work. I described my job, the long hours, the pressure, the soul-crushing monotony of it all. Jane listened patiently, then said, "You know, you're incredibly good at what you do. You're smart, resourceful, and you have a knack for solving problems. You could do anything you set your mind to." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. Not even Sarah. I was used to being the provider, the responsible one, the rock, but Jane saw something more. She saw my potential, my worth. It was a revelation. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I needed to hear that. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something profound. I was falling for Jane. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. I hadn't felt this way about anyone in years. Not even Sarah, in the early days, had made me feel like this. Jane was different. She saw me, the real me, the man buried beneath the layers of responsibility and resentment. And she liked what she saw. I thought about Sarah, her carefree life, her endless pursuit of self-fulfillment. I thought about the years I'd wasted, the sacrifices I'd made. And I thought about Jane, her kindness, her intelligence, her genuine affection. The choice was clear. I was done with the past. I was ready for a future with Jane. It was a scary thought, a leap of faith, but I was ready to take it. I was ready to embrace the unknown, to finally live my own life. Sarah's discovery of Jane, and by extension, my burgeoning happiness, was a classic case of social media backfire. She was scrolling through Instagram, probably looking for inspiration for her next spiritual journey, when she stumbled upon a photo, me, smiling, with Jane at a restaurant. Looking happy. The caption, courtesy of Jane, was innocuous enough. Enjoying a lovely evening with a wonderful man. But for Sarah, it was a declaration of war. Her initial reaction was disbelief. She stared at the photo, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows furrowed in confusion. Then, the disbelief morphed into anger. A red-hot, incandescent rage that only a scorned woman with a penchant for self-help books could muster. The contrast between her carefully curated Instagram feed, filled with pictures of her serene yoga poses and inspirational quotes, and this image of me, genuinely happy, was too much to bear. The phone call came that night. I knew it was her the moment I saw the caller ID. I answered, bracing myself for the storm. "David," she began, her voice dripping with venom, "what is the meaning of this?" "Of what?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "Don't play dumb with me," she hissed. "That picture with that woman." "Oh, you mean Jane?" I said, my voice calm, almost detached. "Yes, we went out for dinner. Is there a problem?" "A problem?" she shrieked. "A problem? You're gallivanting around town with another woman while I'm trying to find my higher self?" "Last I checked," I said, my sarcasm razor sharp. "We agreed to an open marriage. Remember? The liberating experience? That was different." She sputtered. "I didn't expect you to actually date." "So what exactly did you expect?" I asked. "That I'd sit at home, waiting for you to bestow your enlightened presence upon me? That I'd be your personal ATM and nothing more?" "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. I thought you'd be miserable." "Miserable?" I chuckled. "Why would I be miserable? I'm finally living my life, Sarah, something you encouraged me to do, ironically enough." "Well, I've changed my mind," she said, her voice taking on a manipulative edge. "I think we need to update the rules." "Update the rules?" I repeated, my sarcasm reaching critical mass. "What rules are those, Sarah? The ones you unilaterally decided 2 years ago? The ones that allowed you to frolic freely while I became a hermit? Don't be dramatic, she said. I'm just saying, if you're going to see other people, it needs to be just sexual, no emotional attachments. I laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh that echoed through the empty house. That's rich, Sarah, I said. Absolutely rich. You want to dictate the terms of my relationships now? After you spent 2 years doing whatever you pleased? No, Sarah, that's not how this works. You made your bed, now you have to lie in it. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically feel her rage radiating through the phone. Then she hung up. The confrontation was over, but the war had just begun. Sarah had discovered that I was no longer the doormat she once knew. The power dynamic had shifted, and she didn't like it one bit. She was used to controlling the narrative, pulling the strings. But now, I was cutting them, one by one. And she was starting to realize that she was losing control. It was a slow burn, a gradual awakening for her. But for me, it was a revelation. I was finally free. The gloves were off. Sarah, bless her narcissistic heart, couldn't handle the fact that I was no longer orbiting her son. Her attempts to regain control became increasingly desperate, a symphony of manipulation and passive aggression that would have been comical if it weren't so pathetic. The snooping started subtly. Casual questions about my day, thinly veiled attempts to extract information about Jane. Then it escalated. She started following me, accidentally bumping into us at restaurants, even showing up at my office with some flimsy excuse about needing to talk. Her desperation was palpable, a pungent perfume that clung to her like cheap cologne. I watched her unravel with a detached amusement, like a scientist observing a particularly fascinating lab rat. The guilt trips were her next weapon of choice. She'd call, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion, lamenting about how much the kids missed me, how difficult things were for her, how I was abandoning my family. I'd listen patiently, my internal monologue a running commentary of her performance. Oscar-worthy? I'd think, as she choked back a fake sob. The kids, bless their perceptive souls, saw through her act. They knew I was happier, that I was actually present when I was with them. Not just physically there, but mentally checked out. Her attempts to use them as pawns backfired spectacularly. Then came the ultimatum. Part 2. This time, it was divorce. She threatened it like a weapon, convinced that I'd crumble, that I'd beg her to stay, that I'd offer her anything to avoid the dreaded D word. She miscalculated, badly. I want a divorce, she declared, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. And I want the house, full custody of the kids, and enough alimony to maintain my lifestyle. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. Go for it, I said, my voice calm, almost bored. File the papers. Let's see how that plays out. Her eyes widened in shock. She hadn't expected this. She'd expected tears, pleas, negotiations. Not indifference. You don't care, she sputtered. Care, I chuckled. Sarah, you've been living your own life for 2 years. Why would I care if you want to make it official? The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She'd lost. She'd lost control, she'd lost me, and she was about to lose a lot more. The power play had backfired, leaving her with nothing but ashes and regret. The next day, I walked into the office of Miss Evans, my divorce lawyer. She was a formidable woman with a sharp wit and an even sharper legal mind. I laid out the situation, the open marriage, Sarah's threats, my desire for a clean break. Don't worry, Mr. Carter, she said, a glint in her eye. We'll make sure you get what you deserve. As I walked out of her office, a sense of calm washed over me. I was taking control of my life. Finally. It was a long overdue awakening, but it was happening, and I was ready for it. The process was surprisingly anticlimactic. No dramatic courtroom scenes, no tearful accusations, just a series of meetings with lawyers, the rustle of paperwork, and the sterile scent of legal offices. I met Sarah in a neutral conference room, the air thick with unspoken tension. She looked different, older somehow. The carefree glow was gone, replaced by a brittle anxiety that crackled around her like static electricity. "David," she began, her voice hesitant, "can we talk?" "We are talking," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Or rather, our lawyers are. Miss Evans, ever the professional, slid a document across the table. "These are the divorce papers, Mrs. Carter. Please review them carefully." Sarah's eyes scanned the pages, her face paling with each paragraph. The terms were clear, concise, and utterly devastating to her carefully constructed world. Joint custody of the kids, a reasonable but not extravagant alimony payment, and a strict deadline for her to find a job. The gravy train was officially over. "This is unacceptable," she sputtered, her voice rising in indignation. "I deserve more than this." "You deserve what you negotiated 2 years ago, Sarah," I said, my voice cold. "An open marriage. Freedom. Remember?" "But she stammered, her voice trailing off. She had no arguments left. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was no longer in control. The power had shifted, and she was on the losing end. "You have 2 months to find employment, Sarah," Miss Evans interjected, her voice brooking no argument. "After that, the alimony payments will be adjusted accordingly." Sarah stared at the lawyer, then at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. She'd never expected this. She'd always assumed I'd be there, the safety net, the provider, the eternal source of financial security. The shock was evident in her face, a mixture of anger, fear, and a dawning realization that her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. I watched her, a flicker of something akin to pity stirring within me, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of the past 2 years, the loneliness, the resentment, the sacrifices I'd made. No, she didn't deserve my pity. She deserved the consequences of her choices. As I signed the final document, a sense of liberation washed over me. It was over. The charade, the manipulation, the years of quiet desperation. I was free, and it felt damn good. The drive home was exhilarating. The windows were down, the music was blasting, and I sang along, off-key and carefree. I was no longer reacting to Sarah's demands, dancing to her tune. I was dictating the terms, writing my own narrative. And it was a story of freedom, of self-discovery, of a man finally taking control of his own destiny. The power play was complete, and I had won. The job hunt was a rude awakening. Who knew that years of chanting manifest abundance didn't actually translate into marketable skills? My meticulously curated Instagram feed, once a source of validation, now mocked me with its images of carefree travel and spiritual awakenings. The reality was far less glamorous. Resumes were met with silence, interviews were exercises in humiliation, and the once familiar world of lattes and leisurely lunches seemed like a distant memory. "You lack relevant experience," one interviewer said, her expression a mix of pity and amusement. "And your resume, well, it's a bit unconventional." Unconventional. That was one way to put it. Another way was a collection of self-indulgent nonsense that makes you sound like a delusional hippie. I left the interview feeling defeated, the weight of my choices pressing down on me like a physical burden. The realization hit me slowly, like a creeping tide. I'd lost everything. David, my rock, my safety net was gone. The house, once a symbol of our success, now echoed with emptiness. The lifestyle I'd taken for granted, the yoga retreats, the designer clothes, the endless brunches with my tribe, was slipping away like sand through my fingers. The security I'd craved, the knowledge that I'd always be taken care of, had vanished. I was alone. The isolation was suffocating. The friends who once flocked to me, drawn to my carefree spirit and positive vibes, had disappeared. Their calls went unanswered, their invitations ignored. They were fair-weather friends, I realized, attracted to the light but repelled by the darkness. I was left with the silence of the house, the ticking of the clock, the relentless echo of my own thoughts. The regret was a bitter pill to swallow. I'd made a mistake, a colossal, life-altering mistake. I'd traded the best thing that ever happened to me, a man who loved me unconditionally, for the illusion of freedom, the pursuit of a self that I never truly found. I'd chased shadows while the substance slipped away. I thought of David, his kind eyes, his gentle smile, the way he used to look at me with a mix of adoration and amusement. I thought of his sacrifices, the long hours, the quiet dedication, the way he always put our family first. And I thought of myself, the selfish, entitled woman who had thrown it all away. The tears came then, hot and heavy, a torrent of grief and remorse. I'd made my bed, and now I had to lie in it, alone. The price of freedom, I realized, was far higher than I'd ever imagined. The final meeting was a formality, a legal necessity to tie up loose ends. We met at Miss Evans's office, the same sterile conference room where it had all begun. Sarah looked resigned. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by a weary acceptance. There were no tears, no recriminations, just the quiet rustle of papers and the scratching of pens. "Here," Miss Evans said, sliding the final decree across the table. "Sign here and here." I took the pen, the weight of it surprisingly heavy in my hand. My signature felt final, a period at the end of a long, convoluted sentence. Sarah signed without a word, her hand trembling slightly. We avoided eye contact, the years of shared history, both good and bad, hanging in the air between us like a ghost. "Congratulations," Miss Evans said, her voice brisk and professional. "You're officially divorced." I stood up, a wave of relief washing over me. It was done. The chapter was closed, the book finished. I glanced at Sarah, a flicker of something, pity, regret, crossing her face. But I didn't dwell on it. I had no more energy for her drama, no more patience for her games. I turned and walked out of the office, leaving her sitting there, alone with the wreckage of her choices. The air outside felt fresh, invigorating. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and the world seemed to vibrate with possibility. I took a deep breath, savoring the feeling of lightness, the absence of the weight I'd been carrying for so long. It was over. I was free. My narration was a stream of consciousness, a mix of relief, gratitude, and a touch of disbelief. I'd done it. I'd escaped the gilded cage, broken free from the shackles of a life that wasn't mine. I'd faced my fears, confronted my demons, and emerged on the other side, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to live a life true to myself. The first thing I did was call Jane. Her voice, warm and welcoming, filled me with a sense of peace. "It's over," I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm free." "I know," she said, her voice soft. "I'm proud of you." We celebrated that night, a quiet dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. There were no grand pronouncements, no declarations of eternal love, just the easy comfort of shared laughter and genuine connection. It was enough. It was everything. The next few months were a whirlwind of change. I quit my soul-crushing job, the one that had been both my prison and my escape. I sold the house, the one that held so many memories, both good and bad. I downsized, simplifying my life, shedding the excess baggage that had weighed me down for so long. I traveled, exploring new places, meeting new people, expanding my horizons. I reconnected with old friends, the ones who had stuck by me through thick and thin. I spent more time with my kids, really being there for them, present and engaged. I focused on my own happiness, pursuing passions I'd long neglected. I started writing again, the words flowing freely, unburdened by the constraints of my old life. I took guitar lessons, rediscovering the joy of music. I even joined a yoga class, not Sarah's brand of spiritual yoga, but a simple, grounding practice that helped me connect with my body and my breath. My relationship with Jane blossomed. We were a team, partners in crime, two souls who had found each other in the most unexpected of circumstances. We laughed together, cried together, supported each other's dreams, and challenged each other to grow. It wasn't perfect. No relationship ever is. But it was real, and it was ours. I looked in the mirror one morning, a stranger staring back at me. This wasn't the David who had trudged through life, burdened by responsibility and resentment. This was a new David, a man who had found his voice, his purpose, his freedom. The scars of the past were still there, but they were fading, replaced by the vibrant colors of a life finally lived on his own terms. The journey had been long and arduous, but the destination was worth it. I was free, and I was finally, truly happy. Life had a funny way of surprising you. 5 years had passed since the divorce, and the man staring back at me from the mirror was almost unrecognizable. Gone was the haunted look, the slumped shoulders, the air of quiet desperation. In its place was a man who looked, well, happy, content, at peace. Jane and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm. We weren't married, no need for that kind of formality. Our relationship was built on mutual respect, trust, and a shared love of laughter. We'd bought a small house, a cozy space filled with books, music, and the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee. It wasn't a mansion, but it was home. My kids were thriving. Emily, now a teenager, was a force of nature, a whirlwind of opinions and passions. Ben, still my quiet observer, had blossomed into a talented artist, his sketchbook filled with fantastical creatures and vibrant landscapes. They split their time between Jane and me, and Sarah, who, to her credit, had finally gotten her act together. Sarah. The thought of her no longer brought a surge of resentment or bitterness. It was more like a dull ache, a fading scar. She had a job now, something mundane but stable. She'd even traded her flowing bohemian skirts for sensible pantsuits. The spiritual awakening phase seemed to have passed, replaced by a pragmatic acceptance of reality. We were civil for the sake of the kids, but there was an unspoken understanding between us. The past was the past. The kids had adjusted surprisingly well to the new dynamic. They loved Jane, and she loved them. They had a healthy relationship with Sarah, too, one that was free of the drama and manipulation that had characterized their earlier years. It wasn't the picture-perfect family I'd envisioned all those years ago, but it was good, real, and that was enough. I often thought about the journey that had brought me here, the pain, the betrayal, the years of quiet desperation. It would be easy to dwell on the negative, to wallow in bitterness and regret. But I didn't. Instead, I felt a strange sense of gratitude. The pain had been a catalyst, forcing me to confront my own truths, to break free from the chains I'd forged for myself. It had led me to Jane, to a life filled with joy, purpose, and a deep sense of self-acceptance. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah, in her quest for freedom, had inadvertently set me free. She'd given me the space I needed to find myself, to discover my own happiness. It was a twisted kind of gift, but a gift nonetheless. I looked out the window, watching the leaves dance in the wind. The world was full of possibilities, of adventures waiting to be had, of stories waiting to be written. I was no longer afraid. I was no longer defined by the past. I was free. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift of all.